The laughter inside the luxury Lagos conference hall suddenly died when the blind woman stepped onto the stage holding a single black file against her chest. 3 years earlier, Femi Adebayo had abandoned Zulikha Bello in the rain because she was poor, blind, and a burden to his future. But tonight, the same woman he once humiliated stood before the most powerful investors in Nigeria. Femi's hands began shaking because the documents inside Zulikha's file were powerful enough to destroy his company and expose the cruel secret he prayed would stay buried forever. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your country. And if you love emotional stories about justice, hope, and unforgettable life changes, don't forget to subscribe. 3 years before the night that would destroy Femi Adebayo's reputation forever, nobody in Lagos noticed the blind woman selling handmade bead bracelets near a shoddy bus terminal. People rushed past her every day without slowing down. Danfo drivers shouted for passengers. Traders argued loudly over tomatoes and peppers. Motorcycle engines roared through the dusty roadside while the humid Lagos heat pressed against tired bodies like heavy cloth. And in the middle of all that noise sat Zulikha Bello. She always wore the same faded blue scarf tied carefully around her hair. Her fingers moved slowly and skillfully over colorful beads while her small white cane rested beside her plastic chair. Though blindness had stolen her sight when she was 14 after an untreated infection, it had never completely stolen her dignity. But poverty had taken almost everything else. At 26 years old, Zulikha lived in a tiny one-room apartment in Mushin with her elderly aunt Mama Safia. Rain leaked through the rusted roof during storm season. The electricity disappeared more often than it stayed. Some nights they ate only dry bread and weak tea because there was no money for anything else. Still, Zulikha smiled more than most people around her. Not because life was easy, but because she had learned long ago that bitterness could turn suffering into poison. Every morning before sunrise, she sat near the window listening carefully to the city waking up around her. The distant call to prayer, roosters crying behind crowded buildings, women sweeping dusty streets, children laughing before school. Those sounds helped her imagine the world she could no longer see, and almost every evening one person came to sit beside her. Femi Adebayo. Back then, Femi was nothing like the polished executive the world would later admire. He was 29, thin from stress, and constantly exhausted from chasing opportunities that never seemed to arrive. He worked temporary jobs whenever he could find them: delivery driver 1 month, phone salesman, the next office assistant after that. Lagos had a way of making ambitious men feel invisible. Femi hated that feeling more than hunger itself. His father had died years earlier, leaving behind debts instead of inheritance. His younger brother depended on him for school fees. His mother sold fried plantains beside the road in Ibadan to survive. Everywhere Femi looked, he saw men his age becoming successful while he remained trapped. Only Zulikha made him feel peaceful. Every evening after work, he found her by the roadside, and for a few precious hours the pressure inside his chest became lighter. "You're late today," Zulikha said softly one evening as she heard his footsteps approaching. Femi smiled despite his exhaustion. "You always know it's me. You drag your left foot when you're tired." He laughed quietly before sitting beside her. "That sounds terrible. It sounds human." Those simple conversations became the safest part of Femi's life. Unlike other women he had dated before, Zulikha never asked him for expensive gifts or impossible promises. She listened when he spoke about his frustrations. She encouraged him when rejection letters crushed his confidence. Sometimes she even skipped meals secretly to save transport money for his job interviews. But Femi never fully understood the depth of her sacrifices, because deep inside him, shame was slowly growing. Not shame toward himself, shame toward her. At first it was small. He noticed how friends stared when they saw him guiding a blind woman across the street. He heard coworkers whisper things like, "A handsome man like Femi could do better. Why date someone who can't even see your face? She'll only slow him down." Femi pretended those comments did not affect him, but they did. Little by little, ambition began fighting against love inside him. One Saturday afternoon, Femi accompanied Zulikha to Balogun Market to buy bead supplies. The crowded market overflowed with noise and movement. Traders called aggressively to customers while sweat rolled down tired faces under the burning sun. As they walked carefully between stalls, Zulikha held Femi's arm gently. Then suddenly, Femi heard someone call his name. Femi Adebayo. He turned quickly. Standing near an expensive black SUV was Kunle Daramola, his former university classmate. Kunle looked successful in every possible way. Clean designer shirt, expensive wristwatch, confident smile. Kunle Femi said in surprise. The two men shook hands warmly. It's been years, Kunle laughed. What are you doing these days? Before Femi could answer, Kunle noticed Zulikha standing quietly beside him with her cane. Something changed in Kunle's expression. Not cruelty, pity. And somehow that felt worse. Oh, Kunle said awkwardly. Your friend? Femi hesitated. That tiny hesitation wounded something inside Zulikha immediately. Though blind, she had become an expert at hearing discomfort in people's silence. Yes, Femi finally answered. This is Zulikha. Kunle forced a polite smile before quickly changing the subject. Well, listen, I actually work for Adeyemi Global Holdings now. Huge company. We're expanding fast. He reached into his pocket and handed Femi a business card. There may be openings soon. Send me your CV. Femi stared at the card like it was a ticket out of poverty itself. Adeyemi Global Holdings, one of the most powerful companies in Lagos. Real salaries, corporate offices, opportunity. For the first time in years, hope exploded inside him. That night, while rain hammered loudly against their leaking roof, Zulikha listened carefully as Femi spoke excitedly about the opportunity. This could change everything, he whispered. I know, Zulikha replied warmly. I could finally take care of my family properly. You deserve that chance. Femi looked at her quietly in the darkness, and for one brief moment, guilt touched him. Because instead of imagining success with Zulikha beside him, he was imagining the kind of woman successful men were expected to have. Elegant, educated, beautiful, not poor, not blind, not sitting beside bus stations selling bracelets. Femi hated himself for thinking it, but the thought stayed anyway. A week later, he received a call inviting him for an interview at Adeyemi Global Holdings headquarters on Victoria Island. The night before the interview, Zulikha stayed awake, helping him prepare. She ironed his only white shirt carefully despite the electricity cutting twice. She polished his worn shoes with cooking oil because they could not afford proper polish. She even used money she had secretly saved for medicine to pay his transport fare. You shouldn't have done that, Femi said quietly after discovering it. You need this opportunity more than I need medicine. Her words sat heavily inside his chest. The next morning before sunrise, Zulikha stood outside their building holding his hand tightly. You will succeed, she told him. How can you be so sure? Because every time life pushes you down, you stand up again. Femi swallowed hard. Then he kissed her forehead gently before leaving. As he boarded the crowded bus heading toward Victoria Island, he looked back once and saw Zulikha standing alone beside the road with her white cane. Small, fragile, poor. And suddenly, for reasons he could not yet explain, Femi felt afraid that the new world opening before him might not have space for her inside it. The headquarters of Adeyemi Global Holdings did not feel like Lagos to Femi Adebayo. It felt like another country entirely. The glass building towered above Victoria Island, like a monument built for people who had never worried about transport fare or unpaid rent. The marble floors reflected polished shoes. Cold air from expensive air conditioners erased the heavy heat of the city outside. Receptionists spoke softly in perfect English, while executives walked through the hallways carrying laptops worth more than Femi's yearly income. Everything about the place intimidated him, especially during his first week. Femi constantly feared someone would discover he did not belong there. He owned only 2 office shirts. He had never used half the software they expected employees to understand. Even the way people laughed during meetings sounded educated and expensive. But Femi learned quickly, very quickly. He stayed late every evening studying reports after other employees went home. He memorized names, strategies, and company structures. He volunteered for difficult assignments nobody else wanted. Hunger had taught him how to survive, and survival often looked like ambition. Within 3 months, senior managers began noticing him. He works like a man running from poverty, one supervisor joked during a meeting. The others laughed. But the statement was true. Every salary payment felt like proof that his old life was finally ending. At first, Femi shared every small success with Zulikha. He would rush from Victoria Island to Mushin after work carrying takeaway food or small gifts she never asked for. Sitting beside her in their tiny room still made him feel calm after exhausting corporate days. One evening, he arrived carrying fried rice and chicken from an expensive restaurant. Zulikha smiled immediately when she smelled the food. "You spent too much money again." "It's my money," Femi replied proudly, "and you should save it." Femi laughed softly while opening the food containers. "You sound like somebody's grandmother. Somebody has to think responsibly." He listened as she carefully searched for her spoon across the table and suddenly felt an ache inside his chest. Not pity, something more complicated. Embarrassment. Earlier that same afternoon, some coworkers had invited him to lunch at a luxury restaurant. For the first time, Femi had sat beside wealthy young professionals discussing vacations in Dubai and business conferences in London. Then, one colleague named Ifeanyi casually asked, "So, Femi, are you seeing anyone serious?" Femi hesitated before answering. "Yes. What does she do?" Again, he hesitated. That hesitation disturbed him afterward more than the conversation itself, because he had not wanted to describe Zulikha honestly. Not in that environment. Not while sitting among polished people who wore expensive perfume and discussed investments over imported coffee. Later that night, while Zulikha happily thanked him for the food, Femi hated himself for feeling ashamed. But shame kept growing anyway. Weeks turned into months. The more successful Femi became, the more distant he slowly grew from the life he once shared with Zulikha. His calls became shorter. His visits became less frequent. Sometimes he canceled plans entirely because executives unexpectedly invited him to networking events or late-night meetings. At first, Zulikha defended him to Mama Sofia. "He's working hard," she insisted. "He's changing," the old woman replied quietly. "No." But deep inside, Zulikha had already begun sensing it too. Blindness had sharpened her understanding of people in ways sighted people rarely understood. She noticed the tension in Femi's breathing during phone calls. She heard distraction inside his voice whenever she spoke about ordinary struggles. Once, while helping her walk through a crowded street market, Femi accidentally let go of her arm while answering an office call. Zulikha stumbled hard against a wooden stall and nearly fell. The market woman shouted angrily, "Can't you see she's blind?" Femi apologized quickly, embarrassed by the attention. But what hurt Zulikha most was not the stumble itself. It was the irritation she heard hidden beneath his apology, as if her blindness had become inconvenient. That night, Femi could barely sleep, because for the first time he admitted something terrible to himself. He no longer saw Zulikha as part of the future he desperately wanted, and yet every time he imagined leaving, her guilt suffocated him. After all, she had supported him when nobody else believed in him. She had starved beside him, prayed beside him, encouraged him when life humiliated him repeatedly. How could he abandon someone like that? But another voice inside him whispered constantly, "Successful men live differently. Successful men marry differently. Successful men do not remain trapped in poverty forever." One Friday evening, Adeyemi Global Holdings hosted a luxury networking event at Echo Hotel for senior staff and investors. Femi almost refused to attend because he lacked proper clothes. Then, unexpectedly, the company offered selected rising employees complimentary tailored suits for the occasion. When Femi saw himself in the mirror wearing the black suit, he barely recognized the man staring back. For the first time in years, he looked powerful, important, valuable. At the hotel ballroom, soft golden lights reflected against crystal chandeliers, while wealthy guests moved elegantly across polished floors. Waiters carried champagne trays between conversations about oil contracts, international partnerships, and stock investments. Femi felt nervous at first. Then something surprising happened. People respected him there. Senior executives introduced him proudly as one of our brightest young talents. Women smiled at him differently. Investors listened carefully when he spoke. For one dangerous evening, Femi experienced what it felt like to belong among powerful people. And that was when he met Temilade Adeyemi. The daughter of the company's founder entered the ballroom wearing a simple but elegant emerald dress that immediately drew attention without effort. Unlike many wealthy women in the room, she carried herself with quiet confidence instead of arrogance. She was beautiful, but what unsettled Femi most was how easily she spoke to him. "You're Femi, right?" she asked after overhearing him during a discussion about regional expansion. "My father mentioned you recently." Femi nearly stopped breathing. The owner's daughter knew his name. Yes, he answered awkwardly. Temilade smiled warmly. You have interesting ideas. Nobody had ever spoken to him like that before. Not as a poor boy trying to survive, not as charity, not with pity. Over the next hour, they talked several times during the event. Temilade asked intelligent questions about his background, his ambitions, and his thoughts on the company's future. But when she casually asked about his personal life, Femi froze again. Do you have a girlfriend? The truthful answer sat painfully in his throat. Yes. A blind woman selling bead bracelets beside a bus terminal. A woman living under a leaking roof. A woman who still counted coins before buying bread. But under the glittering ballroom lights surrounded by powerful elites, the truth suddenly felt impossible to say aloud. So Femi forced a smile and answered carefully. Nothing serious. The lie left his mouth softly. Yet the damage it created would eventually destroy lives. That same night back in Mushin, Zulikha sat awake alone beside the window, listening to distant thunder. Femi had promised to visit after work. Hours passed. Then midnight came. Still no Femi. Mama Safia eventually fell asleep, but Zulikha remained sitting quietly with her hands folded together. Not angry, just deeply unsettled. Around 1 a.m., Femi finally called. I'm sorry, he said quickly over loud background music. Work event. Important networking. That's okay, Zulikha answered gently. But before ending the call, she asked softly, Femi, are you still happy with me? Silence filled the line. Only for 3 seconds, but sometimes 3 seconds are enough to break a human heart. Of course, he replied finally. Yet for the first time since falling in love with him, Zulikha no longer completely believed him. And somewhere deep inside Femi, the man he used to be was already beginning to disappear. By the time the rainy season arrived, in Lagos, Femi Adebayo had already become someone Zulikha barely recognized. Not completely. There were still moments when the old version of him returned briefly. Sometimes he still laughed at her small jokes. Sometimes he still held her hand carefully while crossing dangerous streets. Occasionally he still kissed her forehead the same gentle way he had before success entered his life. But those moments were becoming rare. Most days, Femi now seemed distracted even when sitting beside her. His phone constantly rang with office calls. His conversations revolved around investors' promotions, business dinners, and executive meetings. New expensive cologne replaced the scent of sweat and engine oil he once carried after long workdays. And slowly, without saying it aloud, he began creating distance between himself and the world Zulikha still lived in. One afternoon, Zulikha waited nearly 4 hours outside a small clinic after a medical appointment because Femi had promised to pick her up. Rain clouds gathered heavily above Lagos. Patients left one after another while she remained sitting quietly beneath the building shelter with her white cane resting against her knees. Finally, Femi arrived. But instead of apologizing immediately, frustration exploded from him the moment he stepped out of the car. Do you know how busy I am? He snapped. Zulikha froze. The anger in his voice shocked her more than the lateness itself. I'm sorry, she whispered softly. I thought maybe something happened. Something always happens, he replied bitterly. My life doesn't stop because of hospital appointments. The silence that followed felt painfully heavy. Rain began falling around them in thick gray sheets. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then quietly, Zulikha asked, Are you ashamed of me now? Femi looked away immediately. No. But once again, his hesitation answered louder than his words. That night, guilt consumed him afterward. He remembered the countless times Zulikha had waited for him without complaint when he was unemployed and hopeless. She had never once spoken to him with impatience or disrespect. Yet now, because his life was improving, kindness suddenly felt harder to give. Still, instead of correcting himself, Femi buried his guilt beneath ambition. Because something dangerous had started happening inside Adeyemi Global Holdings. People admired him there. Senior executives praised him openly during meetings. Younger staff members copied his ideas. Temilade Adeyemi increasingly invited him into high-level discussions, usually reserved for older executives. The more respected he became, the more terrified he grew of anything that might threaten his rise, including Zulikha, especially Zulikha. 2 weeks later, Adeyemi Global Holdings announced a massive corporate gala celebrating a new international partnership. Important politicians, investors, journalists, and business leaders from across Nigeria would attend. For rising executives like Femi, the event represented opportunity, visibility, power, a chance to become unforgettable. 3 days before the gala, Zulikha surprised him with a small gift. I made something for you, she said shyly as he entered her apartment. Femi sat beside her while she carefully placed a handmade beaded bracelet into his palm. The colors were simple black and gold. My company colors, he said softly. I remembered. Femi stared silently at the bracelet. Her fingers had probably spent hours creating it. For him, despite everything. You'll wear it to your event, she asked hopefully. Something tightened painfully inside his chest. Because he already knew the answer. No. Of course not. No executive at a luxury corporate gala wore handmade bracelets from poor blind women selling near bus stations. But when he heard the fragile hope in her voice, he lied. Yes. Zulikha smiled immediately. That smile nearly broke him. On the night of the gala, Lagos glittered beneath heavy rain and city lights. Luxury cars lined the entrance of the enormous hotel ballroom, while photographers captured wealthy guests arriving in designer suits and expensive gowns. Inside, the atmosphere overflowed with elegance. Crystal chandeliers glowed warmly above marble floors. Live musicians played soft jazz near the stage. Waiters moved gracefully between tables, carrying champagne and imported wine. Femi looked perfect in his tailored black tuxedo. Confident, successful, important. And for the first time in his life, powerful people treated him like one of them. Then his phone vibrated unexpectedly. It was Zulikha. He stepped toward a quieter hallway before answering. Femi. Her voice sounded nervous. Yes, I just wanted to wish you good luck tonight. Femi closed his eyes briefly. Thank you. There was a pause. Then she asked softly, Are you wearing the bracelet? Femi looked down at his empty wrist. His throat tightened. Yes. Another lie. Oh, she whispered happily. Good. At that exact moment, Temilade appeared beside him, holding 2 champagne glasses. There you are, she said warmly. My father wants you at the investors' table. Femi quickly ended the call. I have to go. Before Zulikha could answer, the line disconnected. Hours later, after several drinks and endless conversations with executives, Femi stood near the ballroom entrance laughing beside Temilade when sudden commotion interrupted the atmosphere. A female security worker approached uncertainly. Sir, there's a woman outside asking for you. Femi frowned immediately. What woman? She says her name is Zulikha. His blood turned cold. For a second he thought he misheard. Then he saw her, standing near the glass entrance beneath the rain, holding her white cane carefully, wearing her old blue scarf, completely out of place among the luxury cars and wealthy guests. Femi's entire body filled with panic. What is she doing here? Temilade asked quietly. I don't know. But deep down he did know. Earlier that afternoon, Mama Safia had suffered severe chest pain. Zulikha tried calling him repeatedly for help, but his phone stayed buried beneath meetings and preparations. Finally, terrified and desperate, she used transport money she could barely afford to come find him herself. She had no idea where she truly was, no idea what kind of environment surrounded her. She only knew she needed help. As security guards blocked her from entering, wealthy guests nearby began staring openly. Some looked uncomfortable, others looked amused. Please, Zulikha said softly. I only need to speak to Femi. One guard shook his head impatiently. This is a private event. He knows me. Femi should have walked toward her immediately. He should have taken her hand. He should have protected the woman who once protected him from hopelessness itself. Instead, fear destroyed his courage. Fear of embarrassment, fear of judgment, fear of losing the powerful future now standing within reach. Temilade looked at him carefully. You know her. And in that moment, surrounded by investors and executives, Femi made the worst decision of his life. Yes, he answered quietly. Then, after a long pause, he added, She's someone from my past, not my girlfriend, not the woman who sacrificed for me, not the person who loved me when I had nothing, just someone from my past. Zulikha heard every word. The pain that crossed her face happened slowly, like glass cracking under pressure. Still, she tried once more. Femi, Mama Safia is sick. People nearby watched openly now. Femi felt humiliation burning through him, and instead of defending her, he exploded. "Why would you come here?" he snapped loudly. "Look around you." The ballroom fell strangely quiet. "You can't just appear everywhere expecting me to stop my life for you." Zulikha stepped backward, slightly stunned. Rainwater dripped from her scarf onto the marble floor. "I'm sorry," she whispered. But Femi was no longer speaking to her. He was speaking to his own fear. "You embarrass me," he shouted. The words echoed brutally near the entrance. Several guests stared in shock. Even Temelade looked disturbed. Zulikha's lips trembled. For one terrible second, she seemed unable to breathe. Then quietly, almost like a broken child, she asked, "So loving me became embarrassing?" Femi said nothing. That silence destroyed her more completely than the shouting. One of the guards gently touched her arm. "Madam," Zulikha nodded weakly. Then, holding her cane tightly, she turned and walked slowly back into the heavy Lagos rain alone. Femi watched her disappear through blurred glass doors while thunder shook the sky above the city. And though he did not understand it yet, that was the exact moment he lost everything that truly mattered. The rain did not stop that night. It poured across Lagos with violent force, flooding roads, swallowing gutters, and turning narrow streets into rivers of mud and garbage. Thunder shook the sky while exhausted street traders covered their goods with torn plastic sheets and hurried home before the storm worsened. But Zulikha Bello had nowhere to hurry to anymore. By the time she finally reached Mushin, her clothes were soaked completely through. Her sandals dragged heavily against flooded ground, while her white cane tapped weakly across broken sidewalks. Inside her chest, something felt hollow. Not anger, not even heartbreak anymore. Just emptiness. She climbed the stairs to the apartment, slowly praying Mama Sofia was still awake. But the moment she entered the room, she knew something was wrong. The air felt strangely silent, too silent. Auntie, no answer. Fear tightened inside her immediately. She moved forward carefully until her hand touched the edge of the mattress. Mama Sofia's breathing sounded shallow and painful. "Auntie." The elderly woman groaned weakly. Neighbors eventually helped carry Mama Sofia downstairs through the rain, while Zulikha stood trembling beside them helplessly. A taxi driver reluctantly agreed to take them to a small, overcrowded clinic after hearing the old woman struggling to breathe. The clinic smelled of bleach sweat and exhaustion. Patients filled every hallway. Nurses moved quickly between beds while crying children clung to worried mothers. Somewhere nearby, a man screamed in pain. After examining Mama Sofia briefly, the doctor sighed heavily. "She needs proper treatment immediately." Zulikha gripped her cane tightly. "How much?" The amount the doctor mentioned felt impossible. Zulikha barely had enough money left for transport home. Still soaked from the rain, she stepped outside the clinic and called Femi again. Once, twice, 5 times. No answer. At that same moment inside the luxury hotel ballroom, Femi sat beside executives celebrating another successful business deal. Music played loudly while investors toasted expensive champagne under glittering chandeliers. His phone vibrated repeatedly inside his pocket. He saw Zulikha's name glowing on the screen and ignored it, because guilt already consumed him too deeply to face her voice again. Back at the clinic, Zulikha slowly lowered the phone from her ear. The truth finally became undeniable. Femi was not coming. Hours later, Mama Sofia suffered a severe stroke. By sunrise, she was dead. The news shattered something inside Zulikha so completely that for several minutes she could not even cry. She simply sat beside the hospital bed listening to the silence where her aunt's breathing used to be. Mama Sofia had raised her after blindness changed her life forever. She had become mother, protector, teacher, and home all at once. Now she was gone, and Zulikha was alone. The burial happened quietly 2 days later. Very few people attended. Poverty often makes grief feel invisible. Femi did not come. Not because he did not know, because by then shame had transformed into cowardice. He told himself she hated him already anyway. He convinced himself appearing there would only worsen things. But deep down, another truth existed. He could no longer bear facing the human consequences of what he had become. 3 days after the funeral, Zulikha returned to their apartment to discover the landlord waiting outside. "You owe 3 months already," he said coldly. "She just buried her aunt." One neighbor protested quietly. I am not running charity housing. Zulikha stood silently while the landlord continued speaking harshly. Without Mama Safia's tiny food-selling income, the rent debt had become impossible to repay. You have 1 week, the landlord warned. After that, leave. That night, Zulikha sat alone in darkness, listening to rainwater dripping through the leaking roof. For the first time in years, fear completely overwhelmed her. Not fear of blindness, not fear of hunger, fear of disappearing. In a city as massive as Lagos, poor people vanished every day without anyone noticing, and now there was nobody left to protect her. The next week became a nightmare. She tried returning to Oshodi bus terminal to sell bracelets again, but business had worsened badly during the rainy season. Some days she earned almost nothing. Other traders viewed her with impatience now that Mama Safia was gone. Move your chair, you're blocking customers. Hurry up. Meanwhile, the landlord's threats grew more aggressive daily. Then one afternoon, everything collapsed completely. When Zulikha returned from the market, her belongings were piled outside the building beneath the hot afternoon sun. Her mattress, her cooking pot, her clothes. Even Mama Safia's old prayer mat. The landlord stood nearby with crossed arms. I warned you. Zulikha's breathing became shaky. Please, just a little more time. You should have thought about that before failing to pay. Humiliation burned through her body as neighbors watched silently from nearby doorways. Some pitied her. Others simply looked relieved it was not happening to them. Zulikha knelt slowly beside her belongings, trying desperately not to cry in public. That was when she heard an unfamiliar older woman's voice nearby. This is wickedness. The speaker approached slowly with measured footsteps. Her name was Mama Abena Mensah, a 65-year-old Ghanaian widow who sold secondhand fabrics in Lagos Island Market. Unlike many people nearby, Mama Abena did not stare at Zulikha with pity. She stared with anger. How do you throw a blind woman into the street? She demanded sharply at the landlord. That is not your business. It became my business the moment you lost your humanity. The landlord muttered something bitter before walking away. For a while, silence lingered. Then Mama Abena crouched carefully beside Zulikha. What is your name, Zulikha? You have somewhere to sleep tonight. Zulikha hesitated. No. Mama Abena nodded slowly, as though confirming something to herself. Then she said the words that would quietly change the course of Zulikha's entire life. You can stay with me until you stand again. At first, Zulikha refused repeatedly. She hated becoming another burden, but Mama Abena remained firm. Pride does not feed hungry people, the older woman said gently. Mama Abena's home stood in a modest neighborhood near Yaba. Small, old, simple, but clean and peaceful. The scent of ginger tea and fabric soap filled the rooms. For the first time in weeks, Zulikha slept safely. Yet healing did not come quickly. Some nights she cried silently beneath her blanket while remembering Femi's voice shouting at her outside the ballroom. You embarrass me. The words replayed endlessly inside her mind. Meanwhile, Femi buried himself deeper into work. His promotion arrived only a month later. A corner office, higher salary, executive privileges. Everyone congratulated him, but success no longer felt as satisfying as he imagined. Because sometimes late at night, after business dinners ended and city noise faded outside his luxury apartment window, he remembered Zulikha standing in the rain, holding her white cane while he destroyed her dignity in front of strangers. And for brief moments, he hated himself. Still, he never called. Cowardice kept winning. One evening, while helping Mama Abena organize old storage boxes filled with fabric invoices and company papers, Zulikha accidentally touched a thick sealed envelope that felt different from the others. What is this? She asked curiously. Mama Abena suddenly became tense. Nothing important, but Zulikha had already noticed something unusual. Several documents inside carried the name Adeyemi Global Holdings, the same company where Femi now worked. And though she could not yet understand it, that envelope contained the first hidden thread connecting her suffering to a much larger secret waiting silently beneath the surface. For many weeks after moving into Mama Abena's small house in Yaba, Zulikha Bello lived like someone walking through smoke. Everything around her felt distant, muted, heavy. She still woke before sunrise out of habit, but now she no longer sat peacefully listening to Lagos waking around her. Instead, she remained motionless on her mattress, staring into the darkness behind her blind eyes, while painful memories replayed endlessly inside her mind. Femi's voice, the laughter from the ballroom, the shame of standing helplessly in the rain while strangers watched her humiliation. Worst of all was the question she could not stop asking herself. How could someone who once loved her become so cruel? Mama Abena never forced her to talk about it. The older woman understood suffering too well for that. Instead, she practiced quiet kindness. Every morning, she prepared ginger tea before leaving for the market. Every evening, she brought home leftover bread or rice without making Zulikha feel like charity. Sometimes she simply sat beside her in silence while distant traffic hummed outside the house. Little by little, that silence became healing. One afternoon, while sorting fabric orders together, Mama Abena spoke gently without looking up. "You are waiting for your life to end." Zulikha's fingers stopped moving immediately. "I don't know how to begin again." "Yes, you do." "No," she whispered weakly. "Everything is gone." Mama Abena turned toward her. "Blindness did not destroy you. Poverty did not destroy you. Losing your aunt did not destroy you." Her voice softened carefully. "So why should one weak man destroy you?" The words settled deeply inside Zulikha's chest, not because they magically erased her pain, but because for the first time since the ballroom incident, someone reminded her she was still more than what had happened to her. A few days later, Mama Abena brought home a flyer from a disability advocacy center in Surulere. "They teach business skills and technology for visually impaired people," she explained. Zulikha immediately shook her head. "I can't afford classes. The program is free. I'm too old to start over. You are 26, not 80. Zulikha almost smiled. Almost. The following Monday, Mama Abena personally escorted her to the center. The building itself was modest, but the atmosphere inside shocked Zulikha immediately. Instead of pity, she heard confidence in people's voices. Blind men discussed employment opportunities. Young women practiced computer software using screen readers. Staff members spoke about independence instead of limitation. For the first time in years, Zulikha entered a space where blindness was not treated like a tragedy. A woman named Chiamaka supervised the training program. She was visually impaired herself and carried an energy that filled every room she entered. During introductions, Chiamaka asked each participant a simple question. "What do you want your future to look like?" When it became Zulikha's turn, she hesitated, because she genuinely no longer knew. Finally, she answered softly, "I want to stop feeling helpless." The room became quiet. Then Chiamaka replied, "Good. That means you're ready to learn." The training changed Zulikha slowly. At first, even small tasks felt overwhelming. Learning computer accessibility software frustrated her constantly. She struggled using screen reading technology. Navigating unfamiliar streets independently terrified her. But beneath the fear, something else began returning. Pride. Not arrogant pride. Dignity. Every new skill reminded her that her life was not over simply because one man rejected her. Weeks turned into months. Zulikha learned digital communication systems, financial literacy, and accessibility consulting basics. She attended workshops about disability rights across Nigeria and Ghana. She met blind lawyers, teachers, business owners, and activists who refused to disappear quietly from society. Some had suffered worse than she had, yet they kept moving forward. Their resilience slowly awakened her own. Meanwhile, Femi's life continued rising rapidly. His relationship with Temelade Adeyemi became increasingly serious, though neither officially announced it publicly yet. Inside the company, rumors already circulated that the owner's daughter strongly favored him. Executives treated him differently now, with respect, sometimes even fear. And yet, despite the success surrounding him, Femi felt strangely restless, because success had not erased guilt the way he expected. Instead, guilt followed him everywhere. During meetings, inside elevators, late at night beside expensive apartment windows overlooking Lagos Island. Sometimes he almost called Zulikha, but then shame stopped him again. What could he possibly say now? "Sorry for abandoning you publicly. Sorry, your aunt died while I ignored your calls. Sorry I traded your love for status." Cowardice kept him silent. One Saturday afternoon, while helping organize documents inside Mama Abena's storage room again, Zulikha carefully sorted old company files by texture and labeling tabs. Then suddenly she paused. This paper feels newer. Mama Abena became tense immediately. Leave that one. But Zulikha had already noticed the familiar raised company seal beneath her fingertips. Adeyemi Global Holdings' silence filled the room. Then slowly, Mama Abena sat down. There are things I never wanted to involve you in. Zulikha turned toward her voice carefully. What things? For a long moment, the older woman said nothing. Finally, she sighed heavily. Years ago, before my husband died, he worked in financial compliance for Adeyemi Global. Zulikha frowned slightly. What does that mean? He investigated suspicious transactions inside the company. The room suddenly felt colder. Mama Abena continued quietly. He discovered evidence that certain executives were secretly moving money through fake supplier contracts and offshore accounts. Zulikha's breathing slowed. What happened? He reported it internally. Bitterness entered the older woman's voice. 3 weeks later, he died in what police called a robbery. A terrible silence followed. Even without sight, Zulikha could hear buried grief trembling beneath Mama Abena's calmness. You think he was murdered? I think powerful people protect themselves. Then Mama Abena touched the envelope gently. My husband hid copies of certain financial records before he died. I kept them all these years because I was afraid. Zulikha's mind immediately drifted toward Femi, toward Adeyemi Global Holdings, toward the company that had transformed him into someone unrecognizable. What kind of records? Illegal payments, shell companies, executive approvals. Zulikha swallowed hard, and for the first time a frightening possibility entered her mind. What if the world Femi sacrificed everything to join was rotten underneath? That night, long after Mama Abena slept, Zulikha sat awake alone, thinking carefully. Hatred would have been easier, simpler. But what she felt toward Femi now was more painful than hatred, disappointment. Because deep inside, part of her still remembered the young man who once sat beside her near Oshodi bus terminal, dreaming about a better life. How had ambition twisted him so completely? The following week, Chiamaka introduced Zulikha to a legal advocacy network, assisting disabled workers facing discrimination and exploitation. During one seminar, a speaker discussed corporate corruption and ethical accountability in Nigeria's private sector. Every word pulled Zulikha's thoughts back toward the hidden documents, toward Adeyemi Global Holdings, toward unanswered questions. After the seminar ended, Chiamaka noticed her unusual silence. What's wrong? Zulikha hesitated carefully before answering. What if somebody discovered corruption inside a powerful company? Chiamaka studied her expression. Then they would need courage, even if dangerous people were involved. Yes. Zulikha lowered her head slightly, because something inside her had begun changing quietly. For months, she believed survival alone was enough. Now, for the first time, another possibility was beginning to emerge. Purpose. And though she still did not fully understand where the path ahead would lead, Zulikha Bello was no longer the broken woman abandoned in the rain outside a luxury ballroom. Slowly, painfully, she was becoming someone stronger, someone capable of fighting back. 3 years changed Lagos. New luxury towers rose above Victoria Island. More buses flooded crowded roads. Street traders disappeared from some corners while richer businesses replaced them with shining storefronts and security guards. But the city was not the only thing that changed. Zulikha Bello changed too. The transformation happened slowly enough that she barely noticed it herself at first. One workshop became two. Two became a certification program. Then came public speaking invitations, consulting opportunities, and advocacy partnerships with organizations across Nigeria and Ghana focused on disability accessibility in business spaces. The same woman once abandoned beside a bus terminal now advised companies on how visually impaired employees and customers could navigate workplaces independently. Her voice became calm, measured, respected. She no longer spoke like someone apologizing for existing. And though blindness still shaped her life every single day, it no longer defined the limits of her future. One bright Tuesday morning, Zulikha stood confidently inside a newly renovated office building in Abuja, while explaining accessibility recommendations to senior managers. The problem is not disability, she said firmly. The problem is designing society as if disabled people do not exist. Several executives listened carefully while typing notes. 3 years earlier, moments like this would have felt impossible. After the meeting ended, her assistant Adayeze handed her a cup of tea. "You were brilliant again," the younger woman said proudly. Zulikha smiled faintly. Adayeze had joined her consulting team almost a year earlier after volunteering at a disability rights conference in Enugu. Energetic, outspoken, and fiercely protective, she often treated Zulikha less like a boss and more like family. "You say that every meeting." "Because it's true, every meeting." Zulikha laughed softly. The sound surprised even her sometimes. For a long time after Femi's betrayal, laughter had disappeared completely from her life. Now it was slowly returning, not because the pain vanished, but because healing finally began creating space beside it. That evening, after returning to Lagos, Zulikha visited Mama Abena's house as she did every Friday. Though her consulting work now earned enough for her own apartment in Surulere, she refused to disappear from the woman who helped rebuild her life. Mama Abena greeted her warmly at the door. "You're thinner again. That means business is good. That means you forget to eat." Inside the house, the familiar scent of ginger and old fabric instantly made Zulikha feel grounded. Safe. For a while they drank tea quietly while distant generators hummed outside in the evening heat. Then Mama Abena spoke carefully. "You're working too much. I like working." "No," the older woman replied gently. "You like avoiding silence." Zulikha's smile faded slightly, because once again Mama Abena saw through her too easily. The truth was simple. Despite her success, certain wounds inside her never fully healed. Sometimes late at night, she still remembered standing outside the ballroom in the rain while strangers stared at her humiliation. Some mornings, she still woke hearing Femi's voice inside her memory. "You embarrass me." The words no longer destroyed her the way they once had, but scars do not disappear simply because skin closes around them. Mama Abena reached for her hand. "You built a new life, Zulikha, but you still carry pain like a hidden stone inside your chest." Zulikha lowered her head quietly. "What if I never completely stop hurting?" "Then you keep living anyway." Those words stayed with her long after the conversation ended. Meanwhile, across Lagos Island, Femi Adebayo's life appeared perfect from the outside. At 32 years old, he had become one of the youngest senior executives inside Adeyemi Global Holdings. Business magazines occasionally mentioned his name when discussing rising corporate leaders in Nigeria. He attended investor conferences in Nairobi, Accra, and Johannesburg. Expensive suits filled his apartment wardrobe. And yes, he was now officially engaged to Temilade Adeyemi. The engagement announcement spread quickly through elite business circles. Powerful families congratulated them. Executives praised the match. Social media celebrated the glamorous couple. Everything Femi once dreamed about had finally become real. So why did he feel so restless? That question haunted him constantly, especially during quiet moments. Sometimes he stared at himself in luxury hotel mirrors and barely recognized the man staring back. The ambitious young dreamer from Mushin had disappeared beneath layers of wealth image and performance. Worse still, Adeyemi Global Holdings had begun developing dangerous internal tensions. Over the last year, whispers of financial irregularities quietly spread through certain departments. Missing funds, strange supplier contracts, unexplained offshore transfers. Whenever questions emerged, senior leadership buried them quickly. Femi initially ignored the warning signs. Corporate politics always carried secrets, but recently the situation had grown more serious. One afternoon during a closed executive meeting, an older board member named Chief Bako raised concerns directly. "We need independent auditing before shareholders become suspicious." The room became tense immediately. Another executive dismissed the concern sharply. "There is no evidence of wrongdoing." "There is enough evidence to worry me," Chief Bako replied coldly. Femi remained silent throughout the exchange, but anxiety quietly settled inside him. Because over time he himself had approved several financial documents without carefully questioning their origins. At first he trusted senior leadership completely. Now he was no longer certain. 2 weeks later, while reviewing emails in his office, Femi received unexpected news from Human Resources. An independent accessibility and ethics consulting group had been invited to participate in an upcoming corporate compliance review. The lead consultant's name instantly froze his blood: Zulikha Bello. For several seconds, he simply stared at the screen, unable to breathe properly. No, it couldn't be her. But it was. Attached beneath the email was a short professional biography: Zulikha Bello, disability accessibility consultant, ethics advisor, and regional inclusion specialist working across West Africa. Femi reread the words repeatedly. The woman he abandoned in the rain now advised major corporations. His chest tightened painfully. A strange mixture of emotions overwhelmed him at once: shock, disbelief, curiosity, and buried deepest beneath everything else, fear. Not fear of revenge, fear of facing the person who once knew him before ambition poisoned him completely. That evening, Temilade noticed his unusual silence during dinner at an upscale restaurant overlooking the Lagos Lagoon. "What's wrong with you lately?" she asked. "Just work stress. You've been saying that for months." Femi forced a small smile. "Occupational hazard." But Temilade studied him carefully. Unlike many wealthy people around her, she possessed strong instincts about emotional dishonesty. Though she loved Femi deeply, part of her increasingly sensed hidden parts of him she still did not fully understand. "Are you happy?" she asked quietly. The question unsettled him immediately, because once upon a time Zulikha used to ask him the exact same thing. And just like before, he no longer knew how to answer honestly. 2 days later, Zulikha received the official invitation herself. Adeyeze read the email aloud excitedly inside their office. "Adeyemi Global Holdings wants you personally involved in the audit review." This is huge. Zulikha's fingers slowly tightened around her teacup. She had spent years preparing herself to move forward, to heal, to become stronger than the woman Femi abandoned. But hearing the company's name again still awakened old pain instantly. Adeyeze noticed her silence. "You know them?" After a long pause, Zulikha answered softly, "Yes." Then she lifted her chin carefully. "When is the meeting next Monday?" Outside the office window, Lagos traffic roared endlessly beneath the fading evening sunlight, and somewhere inside that enormous, restless city, two people whose lives had once shattered each other were moving slowly toward the same collision again. Neither fully understood yet how much damage still waited ahead. Monday morning arrived with heavy Lagos humidity pressing against the city like a warning. Traffic crawled endlessly across Victoria Island while impatient drivers leaned on their horns beneath gray skies threatening rain. Office workers hurried into glass buildings carrying coffee cups and laptop bags, each person chasing survival in different forms. Inside Adeyemi Global Holdings headquarters, tension already filled the air long before the first meeting began. Executives moved quickly between offices, whispering about the upcoming audit review. Emails circulated constantly. Financial teams double-checked reports that should have been verified months earlier. Something was wrong inside the company. Everyone could feel it, even if nobody wanted to say it aloud. Femi Adebayo stood near the wide glass windows of his executive office, staring silently at the city below. His expensive navy suit fit perfectly. His polished shoes reflected the morning light. To anyone outside the room, he looked exactly like the successful corporate leader he had spent years trying to become. But internally, he felt unsettled, because somewhere inside the building, Zulikha Bello was about to walk in again after 3 years. And for the first time since abandoning her, Femi could no longer control the distance between them. A knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." Temilade entered holding a tablet against her chest. "You're already here early?" "Couldn't sleep." She studied his face carefully. The exhaustion beneath his eyes had become impossible to hide recently. "You're nervous about the audit. It's routine." "No," she replied quietly. "Something else is bothering you." Femi forced a smile. "Work pressure." Temilade did not answer immediately. Over the years, she had learned that Femi often hid emotional truths beneath polished answers. It frustrated her sometimes, though she rarely confronted him directly. Instead, she walked closer. "My father wants everyone in the conference room by 9. Femi nodded. Then just before leaving, Temilade paused near the door. "This consultant they hired," she said carefully. Why did you react strangely when you saw her name? The question tightened something inside his chest instantly. I didn't react strangely. You went silent for almost an hour. For a brief moment, he considered telling the truth. Not everything, just enough. But fear returned again like always. Fear of judgment. Fear of losing the image he built so carefully. She's someone I used to know, he answered finally. Temelada waited. That's all yes. She nodded slowly, though clearly unconvinced. Then she left. At exactly 8:45 a.m., Zulikha Bello entered Adeyemi Global Holdings headquarters for the first time since the night her life collapsed outside its ballroom gala. But this time nobody stopped her at the entrance. Nobody looked at her with pity. Nobody treated her like embarrassment. Instead, the receptionist greeted her respectfully. Welcome, Ms. Bello. Adeyes walked beside her carrying files while another staff member guided them toward the executive conference floor. Zulikha's white cane moved calmly across polished marble floors that once symbolized humiliation in her memory. Now they symbolize something else entirely. Survival. Her breathing remained steady, but internally old emotions stirred painfully. Even the scent of expensive perfume and cold air conditioning pulled memories from deep inside her chest. 3 years ago, she entered this world desperate and unwanted. Today, she entered it invited. That difference mattered more than anyone around her understood. Inside the executive conference room, senior management gathered around an enormous polished table while assistants prepared projectors and audit materials. Conversations quieted the moment Zulikha entered. Some executives recognized her name from recent accessibility conferences and consulting projects. Others simply noticed the calm authority in her voice and posture immediately. Then Femi heard her speak. Good morning. His entire body froze. 3 years disappeared instantly. Suddenly he remembered Oshodi bus terminal, cheap plastic chairs, her laughter beside crowded roads, the softness in her voice before ambition poisoned everything between them. He turned slowly toward the sound, and there she was. Zulikha wore a simple cream-colored dress with a dark green blazer. Her scarf matched elegantly wrapped carefully around her hair. Though blindness still shaped the direction of her gaze, confidence transformed the entire way she carried herself. She no longer looked fragile, no longer looked like someone waiting to be rescued. Something inside Femi twisted painfully, because against all expectations, she had survived him. Worse still, she had become stronger without him. Zulikha sensed his presence immediately, not through sight, through silence. Some wounds teach people how to recognize certain souls even before words appear. For one brief moment, the room around them seemed to disappear completely. Then professionalism returned to her voice. Thank you for inviting our team, she said calmly. We hope this review process strengthens both ethical compliance and accessibility standards within the company. Her composure unsettled Femi more than anger would have. No accusation, no bitterness, no visible hatred, just calm professionalism. And somehow that hurt worse. The meeting began. Financial officers presented reports. Department heads explained operational structures. Consultants asked questions regarding compliance procedures and accessibility policies across company branches. Throughout the entire process, Zulikha remained focused and precise. She listened carefully to inconsistencies others overlooked. She asked intelligent questions about supplier contracts, approval systems, and procurement records. Several executives grew visibly uncomfortable, especially when discussion shifted toward unexplained expenditures linked to regional infrastructure budgets. One manager cleared his throat nervously. Those transactions were approved internally. By whom? Zulikha asked calmly. The man hesitated. Femi noticed. An anxiety quietly deepened inside him, because over the past year he himself had approved several of those same documents without fully investigating them. At the time, senior leadership assured him everything was legitimate. Now uncertainty returned like poison. Halfway through the meeting, there was a short coffee break. Executives scattered into smaller conversations while assistants distributed refreshments near the windows overlooking Lagos Lagoon. Femi stood alone near the far side of the room, trying unsuccessfully to steady his breathing. Then he heard the soft tap of Zulikha's cane approaching. Every muscle inside him tightened. She stopped a short distance away. Neither spoke immediately. Finally, Zulikha broke the silence. You sound tired. The simplicity of the statement almost shattered him. You recognized my voice instantly. A faint, sad smile touched her lips. I used to know your footsteps before you even spoke. Guilt hit him with brutal force. For a moment, corporate offices and polished suits disappeared completely. He felt like the same poor young man from Mushin again, except now he carried far uglier sins. How have you been? He asked quietly. Zulikha tilted her head slightly. That's a strange question after 3 years. He swallowed hard. I know. Another silence followed. Then, against his expectation, she asked gently, Did you ever feel sorry? The question pierced deeper than accusation could have. Femi stared at her speechless, because the truthful answer was yes, every single day. But guilt without courage changes nothing. Yes, he whispered, finally. Zulikha nodded slowly, not satisfied, not comforted, simply acknowledging the answer. Then she said something that unsettled him even more. I spent a long time hating myself after that night. Femi closed his eyes briefly in pain. Zulikha, but eventually she continued softly. I realized your cruelty said more about your fears than my worth. Those words struck him harder than any insult could have. Before he could respond, another executive called his name from across the room. The moment ended. Zulikha turned calmly and walked back toward the conference table. But as she moved away, Femi realized something terrifying. The woman he once abandoned now possessed something he no longer had: peace with herself. And for the first time since becoming successful, Femi suddenly understood how emotionally bankrupt his own life had become. Meanwhile, across the room, Temilade watched everything carefully. The tension between them, the unfinished emotions beneath their conversation, the pain hiding beneath Femi's expression, and slowly, quietly, jealousy began awakening inside her. Because whatever history existed between Femi and Zulikha, it was clearly far deeper than someone I used to know. After the first audit meeting, nothing inside Adeyemi Global Holdings felt normal anymore, at least not for Femi Adebayo. For the rest of the afternoon, he struggled to focus on presentations, financial reports, and executive discussions. Every time someone spoke, fragments of Zulikha's voice kept replaying inside his head. Your cruelty said more about your fears than my worth. The words followed him like judgment. Worse still, she was right. For years, Femi had blamed ambition, poverty, pressure, and survival instincts for what happened between them. He convinced himself success required difficult sacrifices. But sitting across from Zulikha again shattered those excuses completely, because she was no longer broken. She was no longer begging for love or dignity. And suddenly Femi could no longer pretend he abandoned her for practical reasons. He abandoned her because he was weak. That truth terrified him. Meanwhile, Zulikha remained calm on the outside, but internally the meeting exhausted her far more than she admitted to Adayeze. By evening, her head ached badly. Returning to the company where her humiliation began reopened emotional wounds she believed had already healed. Hearing Femi's voice again had been worse than expected, not because she still loved him, but because part of her still mourned the version of him that once existed before fear corrupted him. Back at her apartment in Surulere, Adayeze placed takeaway food on the dining table while watching her carefully. You're quiet. I'm thinking. About him, Zulikha smiled faintly. You ask direct questions. I'm from Enugu. We don't have time for confusion. That made Zulikha laugh softly. For a moment, silence settled peacefully between them. Then Adayeze spoke again. So, what kind of man was he before Zulikha leaned back slowly against her chair? The answer felt complicated. He was kind once, she said quietly. Very kind. Then what happened? Poverty. She paused carefully. And fear of staying poor forever. Adayeze frowned. That still doesn't justify what he did. No, it doesn't. Another silence followed. Then Zulikha added something softer. The sad thing is, I think he knows that now. Across Lagos Island, Femi sat alone in his luxury apartment staring at untouched whiskey beside the window. Rain fell lightly against the glass while traffic lights shimmered across wet streets below. Temilade entered quietly around 9 o'clock. You left dinner without explanation. I wasn't hungry. That's not true. Femi rubbed tiredly at his forehead. Can we not do this tonight? Temelati crossed her arms. No, because something is happening and you keep shutting me out. He said nothing. Her frustration deepened. Who exactly is Zulikha Bello? The question hung heavily between them. Femi looked away immediately. Why does it matter? Because the moment she entered that room, you stopped acting like yourself. She's just someone from my past. Temelati's voice hardened slightly. That woman is not just someone. Femi remained silent. And silence often tells the truth more loudly than confession. Temelati stared at him for a long moment before finally speaking again. You loved her. The statement was not a question. Femi closed his eyes briefly. Yes. Pain flickered across Temelati's face despite her effort to hide it. What happened? Again. Cowardice tempted him to soften the truth, but exhaustion finally weakened his defenses. I left her. Why? His throat tightened painfully. Because I thought she would destroy my future. Temelad stared at him in disbelief. Then quietly, almost horrified, she asked, What kind of person says something like that? Femi had no answer, because for the first time in years he was beginning to realize he no longer respected the man he became. The next morning, the audit review continued. Zulikha and her team spent hours examining procurement systems, accessibility compliance failures, and vendor contracts connected to regional projects. The deeper they investigated, the more inconsistencies appeared. Missing approvals, inflated invoices, duplicate supplier accounts. Certain financial patterns repeated too consistently to ignore. During one review session, Adeyeze whispered quietly beside Zulikha, These transactions don't make sense. What do you mean? The same supplier address appears under 3 different company names. Zulikha became still. Cross-checked the payment approvals. A few moments later, Adeyeze exhaled sharply. Femi authorized 2 of them. Zulikha's chest tightened unexpectedly. Not because she believed Femi masterminded corruption, but because she suddenly feared he had become entangled in something far more dangerous than ambition alone. Later that afternoon, while leaving the records department, Zulikha accidentally overheard 2 lower-level employees speaking nervously nearby. They're trying to bury the investigation. Keep your voice down. I'm serious. My cousin in finance said some executives moved money through fake infrastructure contracts for years. And who approved them? That's the problem. Several rising managers signed documents without understanding the full scheme. Zulikha slowed her steps carefully. A terrible possibility formed inside her mind. Had Femi unknowingly helped cover financial crimes? Or worse, had he knowingly participated? That evening, she requested private access to additional procurement records. The request immediately unsettled senior management, especially one executive named Alhaji Sani Musa. Unlike most polished corporate leaders inside the company, Musa carried a colder presence. His voice rarely rose above calm politeness, yet people around him seemed afraid of disappointing him. When informed about Zulikha's expanded requests, Musa's expression darkened subtly. She is asking too many questions. Another executive shifted nervously. She's thorough. She's dangerous. Meanwhile, Femi's anxiety deepened daily. At first, he believed seeing Zulikha again would simply reopen emotional guilt. Now something worse was happening. The audit itself threatened exposing internal corruption he barely understood himself. That afternoon, he confronted one senior finance director privately. These vendor approvals, Femi said carefully. Why are there duplicate accounts? The older man immediately became defensive. You're overthinking routine transactions. Routine doesn't usually involve shell companies. The director's expression hardened. Be careful where your curiosity leads you, Femi. A chill moved through him instantly. For the first time since joining Adeyemi Global Holdings, genuine fear entered his chest. Not fear of losing status. Fear of powerful people hiding ugly truths. That same evening, Zulikha stayed late reviewing archived procurement reports with Adeyeze. Most staff had already left the building. The huge corporate offices felt strangely hollow after dark. As Adeyeze read transaction records aloud, Zulikha organized patterns mentally. Then suddenly, she heard a familiar voice near the doorway. You're still here. Femi. Adeyeze immediately became tense. I'll organize the remaining files outside, she said before leaving the room. Silence settled heavily once they were alone. Femi approached carefully. You work too hard. So do you. A faint sadness touched his voice. You sound different now. So do you. That answer carried more meaning than either acknowledged openly. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Femi asked quietly, Do you hate me? Zulikha lowered her head slightly. There was a time I wanted to, but not anymore. She took a slow breath. Hate is exhausting. The honesty in her answer shook him deeply, because despite everything he had done, she still spoke without cruelty. That kindness made his guilt almost unbearable. Then Zulikha asked the question he feared most. Femi, did you know about the corruption? His entire body stiffened. What corruption? The financial irregularities. I signed documents, he admitted carefully, but I trusted senior management. Did you ever question them? He hesitated. That hesitation told her everything. You were too busy protecting your success, she said softly. The words were not cruel, just truthful. Femi looked at her helplessly. You think I'm a terrible person? Zulikha turned slowly toward his voice. No, she whispered sadly. I think you became a frightened person who kept making cowardly choices until you stopped recognizing yourself. Those words cut deeper than anger ever could, because once again, she was right. And somewhere beyond the conference room walls, hidden forces inside Adeyemi Global Holdings were already beginning to realize something dangerous. Zulikha Bello was getting closer to the truth. By the second week of the audit review, tension inside Adeyemi Global Holdings had become impossible to hide. Employees lowered their voices whenever auditors walked past. Executives held emergency meetings behind closed doors. Finance staff stayed late correcting records that should have been organized years earlier. Fear had entered the building, and fear spreads quickly inside powerful institutions. Temilade Adeyemi noticed the changes immediately. She noticed how senior managers stopped speaking openly around her father. She noticed the nervous expressions exchanged whenever Zulikha's name appeared during meetings. Most of all, she noticed the emotional shift happening inside Femi. He had become distracted, restless, haunted. Some nights he barely slept at all. Other nights he sat silently beside their penthouse windows, staring into darkness while untouched food grew cold beside him. At first, Temilade believed guilt about the past relationship explained his behavior, but now she sensed something larger, something dangerous. One evening, after returning from another exhausting executive meeting, Temilade found Femi alone on the balcony overlooking Lagos Lagoon. Rain clouds gathered heavily above the city, while distant lightning flashed across the horizon. You missed dinner with my parents again, she said quietly. I know. You've said that 3 times this month. Femi rubbed tiredly at his face. I'm dealing with a lot right now. Temilade crossed her arms slowly. And does all of it involve Zulikha Bello? Femi's silence answered immediately. Pain flickered through Temilade's chest. Not only jealousy, humiliation. Because despite being the wealthy daughter of one of Nigeria's most powerful businessmen, she suddenly felt emotionally invisible beside a woman she barely knew. What exactly was she to you? Temilade asked softly. Femi looked away toward the city lights. She believed in me before anyone else did. And you abandoned her. The bluntness of the statement struck him hard. Yes. Why? Again. He hesitated. Temilade's frustration finally broke through. No more half-truths, Femi. I deserve honesty. He swallowed heavily. Because I was ashamed. The words sounded uglier spoken aloud. She was blind, he continued quietly. I thought... His voice weakened. I thought she would hold me back. Temilade stared at him in disbelief. For several long seconds she could not speak. Then finally she whispered, You destroyed someone who loved you, because you wanted powerful people to admire you. Femi closed his eyes. Shame burned through him completely now. But Temilade's pain deepened for another reason too, because hearing the story revealed something terrifying. If Femi once abandoned someone out of fear and ambition, could he eventually betray her too? That question quietly planted itself inside her mind. The next morning, Temilade arrived early at company headquarters. For the first time since the audit began, she requested direct access to internal review summaries herself. As she read through compliance reports, certain details unsettled her immediately. Unexplained procurement chains, repeated vendor accounts, suspicious executive approvals. And Zulikha's team kept pushing deeper. Temilade suddenly realized the audit threatened much more than company embarrassment. It threatened the entire image surrounding her family empire. Later that afternoon, she entered her father's office carrying several printed reports. Chief Adeyemi sat behind his massive wooden desk reviewing investment proposals. "You look troubled," he observed calmly. "The auditors are escalating their investigation." Her father nodded without surprise. That was expected. Temilade hesitated carefully. "Do you trust the people handling our financial operations?" That question made the older man pause. Slowly, he removed his glasses. "Why are you asking?" "Because something feels wrong." Chief Adeyemi studied his daughter quietly. For years, he built Adeyemi Global Holdings into one of the most respected companies in West Africa. But expansion brought complexity. Complexity attracted greed. And though he rarely admitted weakness openly, even he had begun suspecting certain executives abused the company's growth for personal gain. The truth, he said carefully, is that large companies eventually develop shadows. Temilade lowered her voice. "And what happens if Zulikha Bello uncovers those shadows publicly?" The older man leaned back thoughtfully. "Then we deal with the truth." But Temilade was not thinking like a chairman protecting ethics. She was thinking like a woman terrified of losing everything around her. That same day, Zulikha and Adeyemi continued reviewing procurement records inside a smaller archive office away from the main executive floor. Hours of investigation had already revealed troubling patterns. Fake supplier companies registered under similar addresses. Massive regional infrastructure payments with incomplete documentation. Executive signatures attached to suspicious approvals, including several signed by Femi. Adeyemi looked disturbed. "I don't think he created this." No, Zulikha agreed quietly, but he ignored warning signs. "That still makes him responsible." Zulikha remained silent, because deep inside, part of her still struggled emotionally separating the man Femi became from the man he once was. Then suddenly someone knocked sharply on the office door. Temilade entered. The atmosphere changed immediately. Though her voice remained polite, tension vibrated beneath every word. "Ms. Bello, Ms. Adeyemi." Adeyemi glanced uneasily between them. Temilade smiled carefully. "I was hoping we could speak privately." Zulikha nodded calmly. Adeyemi quietly gathered files and stepped outside. The moment the door closed, silence filled the room. For several seconds, Temilade simply stared at Zulikha, not with cruelty, with conflicted curiosity. This was the woman Femi once loved enough to carry guilt for years. The woman whose presence still unsettled him emotionally, and somehow that reality frightened Temilade more than she wanted to admit. "You've changed his behavior completely," she said finally. Zulikha tilted her head slightly. "I didn't come here for personal reasons, but your history with him is affecting everything." A faint sadness crossed Zulikha's expression. "History affects people whether we invite it or not." Temilade hesitated, then quietly asked, "Did you love him very much?" The question surprised both of them. After a pause, Zulikha answered honestly, "Yes." And now Zulikha took a slow breath. "Now I see him clearly." Something about that answer unsettled Temilade deeply, because it sounded less emotional than truthful. Then Temilade's voice hardened slightly. "If this investigation damages the company, thousands of employees suffer, families suffer." Zulikha understood the hidden warning immediately. "You think I'm trying to destroy Adeyemi Global, aren't you?" "No." Her answer came instantly. "I'm trying to understand the truth." Temilade crossed her arms. "And if the truth destroys people," Zulikha's face became still, "then maybe the destruction started long before I arrived." The words landed heavily between them. For the first time, Temilade realized something dangerous about Zulikha Bello. She was no longer emotionally fragile. No longer someone fear could easily silence. And that realization awakened panic. Because powerful families survive through control, but control becomes impossible around people who no longer fear losing everything. Later that evening, Temilade made a decision she would later regret deeply. Using private authority connected to her executive status, she quietly instructed an internal compliance officer to review Zulikha's consulting records and background history. Nothing illegal, nothing openly aggressive, just enough to search for weakness, for scandal, for anything capable of discrediting her if necessary. Meanwhile, completely unaware, Zulikha sat alone in her apartment, listening to rain strike the windows softly. Exhaustion weighed heavily on her body tonight. But beneath the exhaustion, another feeling had begun growing stronger. Instinct. Something inside Adeyemi Global Holdings felt increasingly dangerous now. People were nervous, defensive, afraid. And fear inside powerful organizations often means hidden truths are getting closer to exposure. Her phone vibrated suddenly. Mama Abena, are you home safely? The older woman asked immediately. Yes. Good. Then after a brief hesitation, Mama Abena lowered her voice. Be careful, Zulikha. A chill moved through her. What happened? I received a visit today. From who? Two men asking questions about you. The room instantly became silent. What kind of questions? They wanted to know how long you've known me. Mama Abena's voice trembled slightly now. And whether I ever gave you documents connected to Adeyemi Global. Fear settled heavily inside Zulikha's chest. Because suddenly, the investigation no longer felt like simple corporate auditing. It felt personal. And somewhere inside the shadows of Adeyemi Global Holdings, someone was beginning to panic. The accusation came on a Thursday morning. Sharp, sudden, deliberate. Zulikha Bello had just arrived at Adeyemi Global Holdings headquarters when two internal security officers approached her near the executive elevators. Ms. Bello, one of them said formally, "We need you to come with us." Adeyeze immediately stepped forward. "What is this about?" The older officer avoided eye contact. "There has been a complaint regarding unauthorized access to confidential financial documents." The hallway became strangely quiet. Nearby employees slowed their steps. Secretaries exchanged nervous glances. Inside large companies, scandal spreads faster than truth. Zulikha remained calm. Who filed the complaint? We'll discuss that privately. Adeyeze looked furious. This is ridiculous. But Zulikha gently touched her arm. It's okay. Deep inside, however, a cold heaviness settled in her chest, because she already understood what this was. Fear. Someone inside the company had become desperate enough to strike back openly. The officers escorted her toward a private compliance office on the 23rd floor. The air inside the room felt cold from aggressive air conditioning. A long, polished table sat beneath harsh white lights, while several executives waited silently, including Alhaji Sani Musa. The moment Zulikha recognized his voice, instinct tightened inside her immediately. This man was dangerous, not loud, not emotional. The most dangerous people rarely are. Please sit, Musa said calmly. Zulikha lowered herself slowly into the chair while resting her cane beside her. We received information, Musa continued smoothly, that confidential audit materials may have been copied and shared externally without authorization. And you believe I did this? We are investigating possibilities. His tone sounded polite, but underneath the politeness lived accusation. Adeyeze, who insisted on accompanying her, leaned forward angrily. This entire review process involves external consultants. Access permissions were approved legally. Musa smiled faintly. Nobody is attacking Miss Bello. That sentence itself sounded like attack. Femi entered the room moments later after receiving urgent notification from internal security. The atmosphere immediately felt wrong, too tense, too controlled. What's happening? He demanded. Musa folded his hands together calmly. Routine investigation. Femi looked toward Zulikha. Even without seeing her face directly, he could sense the emotional exhaustion hidden beneath her composure. What kind of investigation? Possible information leakage. Femi's stomach tightened instantly, because suddenly he understood exactly what this was. A distraction. Someone wanted pressure redirected away from the corruption itself, and Zulikha had become the easiest target. This is absurd, he said sharply. Musa's eyes narrowed slightly. Be careful, Femi. No, Femi replied firmly. She's not the problem here. The room became silent. Several executives exchanged uncomfortable glances. For years, Femi had protected his position carefully inside this company. He rarely challenged senior leadership openly, but now something inside him was changing. Cowardice was finally becoming unbearable. Musa's voice hardened subtly. You seem emotionally involved. Femi almost answered immediately. Yes, I was emotionally involved the night I destroyed her life. But instead he said, I'm involved because this investigation is unethical. Zulikha remained silent through the exchange, not because she was weak, because she was listening carefully. People reveal themselves most clearly during moments of pressure. Finally, Musa turned toward her again. Ms. Bello, did you remove or duplicate internal financial records? No. Did you discuss confidential findings outside approved audit channels? I discussed concerns with authorized team members only. Can anyone confirm that? Before Adayez could respond, Zulikha spoke calmly again. You already know the answer to that question. The confidence in her voice unsettled Musa slightly. Because unlike frightened employees he usually intimidated, Zulikha did not sound afraid. She sounded prepared. After another hour of tense questioning, the meeting ended without evidence against her. Still, damage had already begun spreading through the company. By lunchtime, rumors flooded every department. The blind consultant leaked documents. The auditors are corrupt too. Management may sue her. Inside corporate environments, truth rarely matters during panic. Perception matters more. That afternoon, Zulikha sat quietly inside the temporary audit office while Adayeze paced angrily nearby. They're trying to discredit you before the investigation reaches senior leadership. I know. You sound too calm. Zulikha smiled faintly. When people panic, calmness becomes necessary. But privately, the accusation hurt more than she admitted aloud. Not because she feared losing reputation, because the humiliation awakened painful memories. Once again, powerful people were trying to paint her as a problem instead of confronting their own wrongdoing. Once again, she sat inside cold rooms defending her dignity. For a brief moment, the old emotional exhaustion returned. Then her phone vibrated. Mama Abena, you sound tired, the older woman said immediately after hearing her voice. There were complications today. Complications or attacks, Zulikha laughed softly despite herself. You always know. Mama Abena's voice became serious. Listen carefully to me. Powerful people become most dangerous when they realize control is slipping away. The warning settled heavily inside Zulikha's chest. Meanwhile, across the building, Temelade confronted Femi privately inside his office. You defended her publicly against senior management. She was being framed. Temelade crossed her arms tightly. You're risking your position. Femi looked at her with visible frustration. Do you even hear yourself anymore? The question startled her. What does that mean? It means everybody in this company cares more about protecting image than protecting truth. Temelade's expression hardened. You think things are simple? If this company collapses, thousands lose jobs. And if corruption exists... Silence. Femi stepped closer. That woman survived things most people here couldn't imagine. She rebuilt her life from nothing. His voice lowered painfully. And now we're trying to destroy her again because she asked difficult questions. Temelade stared at him quietly, then asked the question she feared most. Do you still love her? The room became completely still. Femi opened his mouth, but no answer came, because the truth itself had become complicated. He did not love Zulikha the same way he once had. Too much pain existed between them now, but he respected her, admired her. And deep inside, part of him still mourned losing the only person who ever truly loved him before money changed everything. That realization terrified him. Temelade saw the conflict in his silence immediately. Pain flashed across her face before she quickly looked away. Later that evening, after most employees left the building, Zulikha remained alone reviewing final procurement summaries. Adayeze had gone downstairs to collect transportation. The huge office floor felt eerily quiet. Then suddenly someone entered. Femi. For several moments neither spoke. Finally, he said softly, I'm sorry about today. Zulikha continued organizing documents calmly. You don't control the company. No, but I understand what they're trying to do. She nodded faintly. They're afraid. Yes. Silence settled again. Then Femi spoke more quietly. I should have defended you years ago, too. The words struck something deep inside her chest, not because they erased pain, but because this was the first time he openly acknowledged failing her. Zulikha rested her hands still upon the table. You know what hurt most after that night? Femi swallowed hard. What? For months I thought maybe you were right. His chest tightened painfully. I thought maybe being blind truly made me unworthy of standing beside successful people. Zulikha. But eventually, she continued softly, I realized dignity cannot be given by powerful people. She turned slightly toward his voice, and it cannot be taken by them either. Emotion burned behind Femi's eyes unexpectedly, because somehow, despite everything, she emerged from suffering wiser than everyone who hurt her. Then quietly, Zulikha reached into her bag. There's something you should know. She placed several documents carefully onto the table. Femi frowned. What is this ownership records? His confusion deepened as he scanned the papers. Then suddenly, his entire face changed, because hidden within complex trust structures and investment holdings was a truth capable of shaking the entire company. Zulikha Bello secretly owned shares inside Adeyemi Global Holdings. Not small shares. Enough to matter. Enough to gain legal standing. Enough to become impossible to silence easily. And for the first time since the investigation began, Femi fully understood something terrifying. The woman everyone underestimated was no longer standing outside the gates begging for dignity. She was already inside the system. The revelation about Zulikha's shares spread through Adeyemi Global Holdings like wildfire. By the next morning, executives who once dismissed her as an outside consultant suddenly treated her with careful politeness. Legal advisors requested emergency meetings. Compliance officers began reviewing documents with visible panic. Everything inside the company felt unstable now. Because Zulikha Bello was no longer just investigating the system, she legally belonged in situ it. Femi barely slept that night. After leaving the office, he sat alone in his apartment, staring repeatedly at the ownership documents she had handed him. The trust structure was complicated, but the implications were simple. Someone powerful had quietly transferred significant shares into Zulikha's control over time. Enough to give her influence, enough to protect her from easy removal. The question haunting him now was why, and who helped her. By sunrise, he finally decided to stop avoiding the truth completely. He drove directly to Mama Abena's neighborhood in Yaba. The area looked nothing like Victoria Island's polished luxury towers. Small roadside shops opened slowly beneath the humid morning heat. Children chased each other between narrow streets while traders arranged vegetables beneath faded umbrellas. Femi parked awkwardly beside the roadside, feeling painfully out of place. When Mama Abena opened the door and recognized his voice, silence filled the doorway instantly. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then she said coldly, "You have courage coming here." Femi lowered his head slightly. "I deserve that." "Yes, you do." Still, she allowed him inside. The small house smelled exactly the same as years earlier: ginger tea, old fabrics, quiet survival. Femi's chest tightened painfully, because this place represented everything he once abandoned while chasing status. Mama Abena sat across from him without offering tea or comfort. "What do you want?" "The truth." A bitter laugh escaped her. Men usually want truth only after lies destroy them. Femi accepted the insult quietly, then asked, "Who gave Zulikha those shares?" Mama Abena studied him carefully for a long moment. Finally she answered, "My husband." Femi frowned in confusion. "I thought he died years ago." "He did." She reached slowly toward an old storage box beneath the table and removed several worn folders. "My husband Kojo Mensah worked in compliance investigations for Adeyemi Global Holdings before his death. He discovered financial crimes involving senior executives moving money through fake construction contracts." Femi listened silently. At first he believed leadership would correct the problem. Mama Abena continued. Instead, the investigation disappeared internally. A cold feeling spread through Femi's body. And then he died. Yes. The room became still. Mama Abena's voice lowered carefully now. Before his death, Kojo secretly purchased shares through small investment accounts over many years. He believed ownership created protection. Her fingers tightened slightly against the folders. When he realized powerful people might silence him, he prepared evidence and transferred certain holdings into protected trusts. Femi swallowed hard. For Zulikha, Mama Abena nodded slowly. He met her once. That surprised him completely. When, after your ballroom incident, Femi felt sudden shame flood his chest again. Mama Abena continued quietly. She came into this house broken. Not angry. Broken. Her eyes hardened toward him. Kojo always believed suffering reveals character. After hearing her story, he said something I never forgot. She paused. He said a woman who survives humiliation without becoming cruel should never remain powerless forever. Emotion tightened painfully inside Femi's throat. Because even now, strangers had protected Zulikha more faithfully than he ever did. Back at Adeyemi Global Holdings, pressure inside the company intensified rapidly. Several board members now demanded independent external review beyond internal auditing teams. Financial media began quietly hearing rumors about compliance concerns. Investors requested reassurance. Meanwhile, Alhaji Sani Musa grew increasingly dangerous. Inside a closed executive meeting, he slammed several documents onto the conference table angrily. This situation is spiraling because people became emotionally compromised. His eyes moved directly toward Femi. The accusation was obvious. Femi stared back coldly. No. This situation exists because corruption was ignored for years. Silence exploded across the room. One executive whispered nervously, "Careful." But Femi no longer cared about caution the way he once did. Something fundamental inside him had changed. Years ago, fear of losing status controlled every decision he made. Now he realized fear itself had destroyed his soul long before corruption threatened his career. Chief Adeyemi entered midway through the argument. Unlike others, the company founder looked exhausted rather than angry. Age suddenly seemed heavier on him lately. "What exactly are we hiding?" he asked quietly. Nobody answered immediately. That silence itself became confession. The older man's expression darkened painfully. "I built this company from nothing," he said slowly. "If people used it to steal from workers' communities or shareholders," his voice hardened, "then I want the truth exposed completely." Alhaji Musa objected immediately. With respect, public scandal could destroy everything. Chief Adeyemi looked directly at him. "No. Corruption destroys companies. Truth only reveals the damage." Those words shifted the room instantly. For the first time, certain executives realized leadership might no longer protect them. Later that afternoon, Zulikha arrived for another review session, accompanied by Adeyeze. But the atmosphere inside the building felt entirely different now. Employees watched her carefully, some with admiration, others with fear. And somewhere beneath everything else, whispers had begun changing. No longer the blind consultant. Now people whispered, the shareholder, the woman exposing the company. Inside the archive office, Adeyeze read newly recovered procurement records aloud, while Zulikha organized patterns mentally. Then suddenly, Adeyeze froze. "What these signatures?" Adeyeze whispered. "They connect directly to Musa." Zulikha became still. "Are you certain?" "Yes." Adeyeze flipped pages quickly. Fake infrastructure contracts approved through shell suppliers. Millions diverted over 4 years. A heavy silence followed, because now the investigation had crossed from suspicion into evidence. Real evidence. And dangerous people rarely surrender quietly once exposure becomes inevitable. That evening, while leaving the office, Zulikha sensed someone following her footsteps through the underground parking garage. She slowed slightly. The footsteps slowed too. Fear tightened through her body instantly. Before she could react, a deep male voice spoke behind her. "You should stop digging." Her grip tightened around her cane. "Who are you?" "That doesn't matter." The man stepped closer. "Some truths destroy everybody around them." Zulikha forced calm into her voice. "Threatening me won't change facts." A low laugh answered her. "You think this is about facts? This is about power." Then the footsteps retreated quickly into the darkness. Moments later, Adeyeze rushed toward her carrying files. "Zulikha." Are you okay? She remained silent briefly before answering. Yes, but inside fear had fully arrived now, because the investigation was no longer just uncovering corruption. It was uncovering desperation, and desperate people often become dangerous. Later that night, Femi received a private message requesting he meet Chief Adeyemi immediately. When he entered the chairman's office, the older man looked deeply tired. I need honesty from you, Chief Adeyemi said quietly. Femi nodded slowly. What do you want to know? Did you knowingly participate in fraud? The question struck brutally. For several seconds, Femi could not breathe properly. Then finally he answered truthfully, No, but I ignored signs because I was afraid of losing position. Chief Adeyemi closed his eyes briefly in disappointment. That fear may cost us all dearly now. Femi lowered his head. Yes. Then, after a long silence, he asked softly, What happens next? The older man stared toward the Lagos skyline beyond the windows. Now he said quietly, We discover how rotten this company truly became. And somewhere else inside the restless city, hidden enemies were already preparing their next move against the woman who refused to stay silent. The closer the truth moved toward daylight, the more dangerous Adeyemi Global Holdings became. By the following week, financial newspapers had already begun publishing suspicious headlines. Questions around internal audits at major Nigerian corporation. Anonymous sources suggest procurement irregularities. Investors demand transparency from Adeyemi Global Holdings. The company's stock value started falling slowly, not enough to cause collapse yet, but enough to create fear. Inside the headquarters, tension poisoned every hallway. Executives whispered behind closed doors. Senior managers avoided eye contact during meetings. Employees refreshed financial news websites constantly between assignments. Everybody sensed a storm approaching, and at the center of that storm stood Zulikha Bello. That reality enraged Alhaji Sani Musa. For years, Musa operated carefully within shadows, manipulating contracts through fake supplier networks, while protecting himself behind layers of approvals and intermediaries. He never expected a blind consultant connected to forgotten compliance records to unravel the system. Worse still, Chief Adeyemi himself was no longer protecting anyone blindly. That made Musa desperate, and desperate men become reckless. One rainy evening after work, Adeyeze arrived breathlessly at Zulikha's apartment carrying fresh documents against her chest. You need to hear this immediately. Zulikha sat upright from the couch. What happened? Adeyeze opened her laptop quickly. An anonymous employee sent these through encrypted mail. What kind of documents? Internal transfers linked directly to Musa. Zulikha's expression became still. Adeyeze continued reading rapidly. Offshore payments, fake contractor accounts, political kickbacks. Her voice lowered. And there's more. What Adeyeze looked up slowly. Someone altered approval chains after transactions were completed. A cold silence filled the apartment, because that meant the corruption network was even more sophisticated than they realized. People inside the system had been rewriting records afterward to shift blame away from themselves, potentially toward lower executives, potentially toward Femi. At that exact moment, Femi himself sat alone inside his office, staring at procurement files spread across his desk. The deeper he investigated privately, the more terrified he became, because now he could finally see the full pattern clearly. Musa and several hidden allies manipulated ambitious younger executives into signing approvals buried inside larger project authorizations. Once documents passed through, enough departments' responsibility became impossible to trace easily. And Femi had signed many of them. Not knowingly, but legally. That distinction might not matter anymore. His phone vibrated suddenly. Temelad. He almost ignored the call from exhaustion, but answered anyway. Hello? You need to come to my father's house immediately. Something in her voice felt wrong. What happened? There's going to be a shareholders' emergency meeting. His stomach tightened instantly. When 3 days, fear moved through him like ice. Because emergency shareholder meetings only happen when companies are approaching disaster. That night inside Chief Adeyemi's mansion overlooking Banana Island, senior legal advisors, board members, and crisis consultants filled the enormous dining hall with anxious conversation. Femi arrived late, and immediately sensed the atmosphere. Collapse. That was what everybody feared now. Chief Adeyemi stood near the windows, looking older than ever before. Without turning around, he spoke quietly. We lost nearly 12% market value in 4 days. Nobody answered. The older man finally faced the room. I spent 40 years building this company. His voice carried exhaustion more than anger. Now greed may destroy everything. One board member cleared his throat nervously. We still have options to contain exposure. Chief Adeyemi's eyes hardened. No more containment. Silence. Then slowly he added, at the shareholders' meeting, the truth will be addressed publicly. Several executives looked horrified, including Musa, because public transparency threatened everything. Later that evening, Musa cornered Femi privately near the mansion gardens. Rainwater dripped softly from nearby trees while security lights reflected against wet pavement. You need to control, Zulikha, Musa said coldly. Femi stared at him in disbelief. What? You still matter to her emotionally. Anger flared inside him instantly. You're insane. Musa stepped closer. If she exposes full procurement records publicly, multiple executives go down. His voice lowered dangerously. Including you. Femi's jaw tightened. I didn't steal anything, but you signed approvals. The words hit brutally hard. Because legally, Musa was right. Then Musa delivered the threat directly. If you care about survival, convince her to stop before the shareholders' meeting. For several seconds, Femi simply stared at him. And suddenly, after years of fear controlling his life, something inside him finally broke completely. No. Musa frowned. Femi's voice became firmer. I already destroyed her once because I was afraid. His eyes hardened. I won't do it again. For the first time, Musa looked genuinely unsettled, because cowardly men are predictable. But men who stop fearing consequences become dangerous. The next afternoon, heavy rain flooded parts of Lagos, while Zulikha prepared final audit summaries inside her office. Adez organized evidence carefully into secure digital backups and printed files. Every document now mattered, every approval, every hidden transfer, every lie. A soft knock interrupted the silence. Femi entered. Even before he spoke, Zulikha sensed unusual tension in his breathing. What happened? There's an emergency shareholders meeting in 3 days. The room became still. And they know exposure is coming. Zulikha nodded slowly. I expected that. Femi hesitated painfully, then finally spoke the truth he had been carrying all week. They may try blaming me publicly. She remained silent. I signed documents, he admitted. I trusted people I shouldn't have trusted. Zulikha lowered her head slightly. You wanted success so badly you stopped questioning the price. His chest tightened. Yes. The honesty in that single word carried years of shame. Rain hammered harder against the windows. Then Femi whispered something he never imagined himself saying. I'm scared, not of prison, not of losing status, of becoming remembered as exactly the kind of man he once hated. Zulikha listened quietly, and despite everything he had done to her, compassion still moved softly inside her heart. Not romantic love, human compassion, because suffering had taught her something powerful. Broken people often break others before they understand themselves. You still have choices left, she said gently. Femi laughed bitterly. Do I? Yes. He looked toward her, voice helplessly. What choice fixes this truth? The simplicity of the answer almost hurt. Femi sat down slowly across from her. For several moments, neither spoke. Then finally he asked the question haunting him most deeply. Do you think I deserve forgiveness? Zulikha's expression became thoughtful. That's the wrong question. What's the right one? She turned slightly toward him. Are you finally willing to become honest enough to deserve redemption? The word struck him harder than accusation ever could, because redemption required more than guilt. It required courage, and courage was exactly what fear stole from him years ago. Suddenly his voice weakened. If I speak publicly at the shareholders' meeting, Musa will come after me. Yes, I could lose everything. Zulikha became quiet for a moment, then softly answered, You already lost yourself once trying to protect everything. Silence filled the room afterward. Heavy, painful, true. Outside Lagos, thunder shook the darkening sky while rain flooded crowded streets below. And somewhere beneath that storm, powerful men were preparing desperately for war. But for the first time in years, Femi Adebayo was beginning to understand something clearly. The most terrifying thing about truth was not what it destroys. It was what it reveals about the people who spent years hiding from it. The shareholders' meeting began at exactly 10 o'clock on a humid Friday morning in Lagos. Outside the massive convention center on Victoria Island, journalists crowded behind security barriers while television cameras pointed toward arriving executives and investors. Luxury cars lined the entrance beneath gray skies heavy with approaching rain. Everybody knew something historic was about to happen. Nobody knew how devastating it would become. Inside the enormous conference hall, tension hung thicker than the cold air conditioning. Hundreds of shareholders filled the seats while board members sat silently near the elevated stage. Lawyers whispered urgently over documents. Financial reporters prepared headlines before hearing a single word. At the center of the stage stood the giant company logo of Adeyemi Global Holdings. For decades, it symbolized power. Today, it symbolized collapse. Femi Adebayo sat near the front row wearing a dark suit that suddenly felt unbearably heavy against his body. Around him, executives avoided eye contact while pretending calmness. But fear revealed itself in small ways. Shaking fingers, forced smiles, dry lips. Across the room, Alhaji Sani Musa remained outwardly composed, though rage burned beneath his silence. He already understood the truth. If Zulikha spoke publicly with evidence, everything would fall apart. Then the room shifted suddenly. Because Zulikha Bello entered the hall, the whispers began immediately. That's her, the consultant, the shareholder, the blind woman exposing the company. She walked calmly beside Adeyemi while holding her white cane with quiet confidence. Her cream-colored dress and dark green headscarf appeared simple compared to the expensive suits surrounding her, yet somehow she carried more dignity than anyone else in the room. Femi watched her approach and felt something painful tighten inside his chest. 3 years earlier, he abandoned this woman in the rain because he feared powerful people would laugh at him for loving her. Now those same powerful people sat terrified of her presence. Life had a cruel sense of irony. Chief Adeyemi opened the meeting with visible exhaustion. For years he had commanded rooms effortlessly. Today his voice carried the weight of betrayal. Thank you all for attending under difficult circumstances, he began quietly. The massive room fell completely silent. Our company faces serious allegations involving financial misconduct, procurement fraud, and internal corruption. Murmurs spread instantly through the audience. Chief Adeyemi continued, I built this company believing integrity mattered more than wealth. If that belief was violated under my leadership, he paused painfully. Then the truth must be confronted publicly. Several shareholders applauded softly. Others looked terrified. Then came the moment everyone feared. Ms. Zulikha Bello, the chairman announced carefully, will now present the audit findings. The room became still enough to hear breathing. Zulikha stepped toward the stage slowly. No fear showed in her expression, only calmness. Years ago, she stood trembling before wealthy strangers while humiliation destroyed her dignity. Today, she stood before even wealthier strangers carrying truth instead of shame. Adeyemi connected presentation files while giant screens illuminated behind them. Then Zulikha began speaking. Her voice remained soft, but every word landed like thunder. 3 years ago, she said carefully, I believed power belonged only to people with money status and influence. Femi lowered his eyes immediately. Zulikha continued, but over time I learned something different. She paused. Power also belongs to truth. The screens behind her displayed procurement chains, financial transfers, and shell company structures. Gasps spread through the audience. Millions of dollars had disappeared through fake infrastructure projects across multiple regions. Schools never built. Medical contracts inflated. Worker funds redirected through offshore accounts. And at the center of the network, Alhaji Sani Musa. The room erupted instantly. Shareholders shouted angrily. Journalists rushed to capture photographs. Board members argued openly across the stage. Musa stood abruptly. These accusations are manipulated lies. But Zulikha remained calm. Every document presented here has been independently verified. More evidence appeared on screen: bank records, executive approvals, secret account structures. The corruption network stretched across years. Then suddenly Musa pointed directly toward Femi. He signed approvals too. The room shifted again. Cameras turned instantly. Femi felt every eye in the hall fall upon him. And for one terrifying moment, old fear returned. The same fear that once made him abandon Zulikha publicly. Protect yourself, deny everything, save your reputation. But then he looked toward Zulikha and saw no hatred in her face, only truth. Slowly, Femi stood. The hall became silent again. His voice shook slightly at first. Yes, he admitted. I signed approvals. Murmurs exploded across the audience. But I never created the fraud. His breathing deepened painfully. I ignored warning signs because I cared more about protecting my career than asking difficult questions. Every camera remained fixed on him now. Femi swallowed hard. For years I told myself ambition justified everything. His voice weakened, including betraying people who loved me. Zulikha became still. The entire room listened. And finally, before shareholders, executives, journalists, and the most powerful people in Lagos, Femi spoke the truth he spent years running from. I became a coward. Silence followed, deep, uncomfortable, real. Then Chief Adeyemi slowly rose from his chair. His face looked devastated. Effective immediately, he announced heavily, Alhaji Sani Musa and all executives connected to these transactions are suspended pending criminal investigation. Security officers immediately approached Musa. The once powerful executive exploded with fury. You think removing me fixes this, he shouted. This entire company is dirty, but nobody defended him anymore. Because fear had changed sides now. For years, innocent people feared powerful men. Today, powerful men feared exposure. As security escorted Musa from the hall, chaos erupted across the room. Shareholders demanded answers. Journalists shouted questions. Lawyers rushed between board members. Yet amid all the noise, Femi remained standing motionless. Because despite everything happening around him, only one thing truly mattered now. He turned slowly toward Zulikha. Emotion burned visibly in his eyes. I'm sorry, he whispered. Not polished corporate apology. Not public relations performance. Real sorrow. For abandoning her. For humiliating her. For becoming someone even he no longer respected. The massive hall quieted again unexpectedly as people sensed the emotional weight between them. Zulikha stood silently for several moments. Then finally she answered, You cannot undo pain, Femi. Her voice carried no cruelty, only truth. But you can stop creating more of it. Tears filled his eyes unexpectedly. Because after everything he destroyed, she still chose wisdom over revenge. And somehow that mercy hurt more deeply than punishment ever could. Outside the convention center, heavy rain finally began falling across Lagos. Thunder rolled above the city while reporters rushed to broadcast breaking news headlines across Nigeria. Adeyemi Global Holdings corruption scandal exposed. Top executives suspended. Massive shareholder investigation launched. But inside the hall, beyond the cameras and collapsing reputations, another quieter truth existed too. The blind woman once abandoned in the rain had walked back into the same world that rejected her, and left with her dignity untouched. While the man who betrayed her stood exposed before everyone. Not because she destroyed him, because truth finally revealed who he had become. 3 months after the shareholders' meeting, Lagos no longer spoke about Adeyemi Global Holdings with admiration. People spoke about survival, about scandal, about betrayal hidden beneath expensive suits and polished conference rooms. News stations replayed investigation updates almost daily. Several executives faced criminal prosecution. Financial regulators launched wider reviews into procurement fraud connected to regional contracts across Nigeria. And at the center of every conversation stood one name: Zulikha Bello. Some people called her courageous, others called her dangerous. But those who truly understood the story called her something simpler: a woman who refused to stay broken. The company itself survived, but barely. Stock values collapsed before stabilizing slowly under emergency restructuring. Thousands feared losing jobs during the chaos. Entire departments dissolved under investigation. Chief Adeyemi stepped down temporarily for health reasons after publicly admitting leadership failures under his administration. And surprisingly, when the board began rebuilding the company's future, one person's voice mattered more than anyone expected: Zulikha's. At first, she refused formal leadership involvement completely. "I'm not a corporate executive," she told the board firmly during one meeting. But several shareholders disagreed. "You protected the company more honestly than the people running it." One elderly investor replied. Even Chief Adeyemi himself personally requested her help before taking medical leave. "You understand suffering," the older man told her quietly. "That matters more than business talent sometimes." After long hesitation, Zulikha accepted a limited advisory role focused on ethics reform, accessibility, and employee protection programs. Not because she wanted power, because she understood exactly what happens when institutions stop valuing human dignity. The changes she implemented shocked many executives. Accessibility programs expanded across every company branch. Scholarship funds opened for disabled students from poor communities. Internal whistleblower protections strengthened. Worker welfare budgets increased dramatically. Some investors complained the reforms cost too much money. Zulikha answered simply: "Companies collapse when people become less valuable than profit." For the first time in years, many ordinary employees inside Adeyemi Global Holdings began feeling seen. Meanwhile, Femi Adebayo's world became painfully quiet. Though investigators eventually confirmed he did not personally steal company funds, his reputation suffered heavily from the scandal. Public trust disappeared almost overnight. Corporate magazines stopped calling. Executive invitations vanished. The ambitious golden boy of Lagos business culture became a symbol of compromised leadership instead. At first, the humiliation crushed him completely. He spent weeks isolated inside his apartment, avoiding calls, avoiding news reports, avoiding mirrors. But eventually, silence forced him to confront something deeper than career failure: himself. For years, he measured human worth through status, wealth, and approval. He abandoned love for ambition, believing success would heal insecurity. Instead, success exposed it. One afternoon, after weeks without speaking, he finally visited his mother in Ibadan. The older woman opened the door slowly and stared at him for a long moment. "You look tired," she said softly. Femi almost laughed bitterly. Tired is a small word. She invited him inside without judgment. That kindness nearly broke him emotionally. Later that evening, while sitting together outside beneath fading sunset light, his mother finally asked, "Do you regret it?" Femi knew exactly what she meant. "Yes." "Losing the company?" He lowered his head. "No." His voice cracked slightly. "Losing myself." The older woman remained quiet, then gently said, "A man can survive losing money, but rebuilding character takes much longer." Those words stayed with him afterward, and slowly, painfully, Femi began trying to rebuild. Not publicly, not dramatically, quietly. He cooperated fully with investigators. He testified honestly regarding internal approvals and executive pressure systems. He volunteered with small business mentorship programs in poorer communities around Lagos. For the first time in many years, he stopped chasing admiration and started chasing honesty instead. As for Temilade, she ended the engagement shortly after the scandal exploded publicly. Not because Femi lost status, because she realized both of them had spent years living inside illusions. "We were performing success," she told him during their final conversation, "not building truth." Oddly enough, there was no hatred between them afterward, only sadness. Two wounded people recognizing how deeply ambition distorted their lives. Months later, on a warm Sunday afternoon, Zulikha visited Oshodi bus terminal again for the first time in years. The city sounded exactly the same. Danfo drivers shouting, traders bargaining loudly, engines roaring endlessly beneath heavy heat. Life continued moving forward. Adeze walked beside her carrying small food packages for street children nearby. "You're smiling," Adeze noticed. "I'm remembering." They stopped near the exact roadside corner where Zulikha once sold handmade bead bracelets long before corporate scandals and shareholders' meetings changed everything. For a long moment, she stood silently listening to the city breathe around her. Then unexpectedly she heard familiar footsteps approaching carefully. Femi. Neither spoke immediately. Finally he said softly, "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me." Zulikha smiled faintly. "You still drag your left foot when you're nervous." He laughed quietly despite himself. Some silences between people carry bitterness. This one carried history. Femi looked around the crowded terminal slowly. "To think this place represented failure," he admitted. "And now, I think it was the last place I still knew who I really was." Zulikha listened quietly. Then she asked, "Are you still afraid of being poor?" The question surprised him. After a long pause, he answered honestly, "No, good," because finally he understood something she learned years earlier. Poverty hurts. Blindness hurts. Humiliation hurts. But nothing destroys human beings more completely than abandoning their own humanity trying to escape suffering. The afternoon wind moved softly through the crowded terminal while distant thunder rolled across Lagos again. Life remained imperfect. Scars remained real. But healing had finally entered places pain once ruled completely. And though Zulikha Bello could not see the world with her eyes, she now saw people more clearly than most ever would, especially herself. After everything Zulikha endured, her story reminds us of a painful but powerful truth. Sometimes the people who hurt us most are people who were once afraid of their own weakness. Pain can turn human beings cruel when they begin worshiping money status or approval more than dignity and compassion. But this story is not only about betrayal, it is about survival, about healing without becoming bitter, about learning that your value does not disappear simply because someone failed to recognize it. Zulikha lost love, home security, and trust. She was humiliated publicly and abandoned during the darkest season of her life. Yet she refused to let suffering transform her into someone cold or hateful. Instead, she rebuilt herself slowly with courage, wisdom, and grace. And in the end, truth exposed everything that pride tried to hide. Femi discovered that success without integrity becomes emptiness. Wealth cannot silence guilt forever. Status cannot replace character. Real redemption only begins when a person stops running from the truth about themselves. To everyone listening right now, never measure your worth through another person's cruelty. Some people reject others because they are afraid, insecure, or spiritually lost. Their blindness should never become your shame. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been judged, abandoned, or underestimated by someone you trusted? And if you believe stories about healing, justice, and hope still matter in this world, please subscribe, like, and share this channel with someone who needs encouragement today. Because sometimes the people society overlooks become the very people strong enough to change it.